I never meant to read my granddaughter's diary. But one sentence shattered everything I thought I knew. Grandma isn't my real grandma. In that moment, every birthday hug, every scraped knee I'd bandaged, every quiet moment we shared, suddenly felt like they belonged to someone else. I didn't know she'd been told a version of me that wasn't true, a story rewritten out of old wounds I never defended myself against. But what I discovered next, and what she eventually wrote in a brand new diary, changed our family forever. You won't believe how the truth finally surfaced, and who it healed first. Before we continue with this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel as we have a special story that'll be released soon. I found the diary by accident, tucked beneath Mia's pillow as I changed the sheets after her weekend sleepover. It was small and pink with a heart-shaped lock that didn't actually lock, something she carried everywhere but never invited anyone to open. I picked it up gently, intending only to place it on her overnight bag, but it slipped from my hand. It fell open on the carpet, pages fanning out like startled wings. I bent down to close it, and that's when I saw the sentence. One line, written in her neat 7-year-old handwriting, tilted slightly as if unsure of itself. Grandma isn't my real grandma. For a moment I didn't move. The room felt strangely hollow, like the air had thinned. I read the sentence again, as if there were a chance it would say something different the second time. But those same 6 words stared back at me, simple and devastating. It felt like someone had taken a small, sharp blade and pressed it quietly into my chest. Not enough to kill, just enough to hurt in a way I didn't know how to describe. I sat on the edge of the bed, the diary still open in my hands. I knew I shouldn't read more, shouldn't be looking at all, but curiosity and pain can be powerful twins. The page held nothing else. Just that one sentence standing alone, as if Mia hadn't known how to continue the thought or perhaps had been interrupted. I closed the diary slowly, my fingers trembling, and placed it on top of her things. The room felt different now, as if her laughter from the day before had been wiped away. My first instinct was denial. I must have misunderstood. Perhaps she meant something else. Children write strange things sometimes. Phrases borrowed from television shows, comments repeated from adults who don't think small ears are listening. But deep down, beneath the optimism I tried to summon, I felt a colder truth settling in my bones. Children might exaggerate, but they rarely lie about what they feel. And the simplicity of her sentence carried a sincerity that frightened me. I walked to the kitchen and stood there for a long time, the silence of the house suddenly louder than it had been in years. I thought of every birthday gift I'd wrapped with care, every school play I attended, every night she fell asleep against my shoulder. I remembered her small hand slipping into mine at the grocery store, the way she'd call my name when she lost sight of me in a crowd. I remembered believing, without question, that we shared the kind of bond only grandmothers and granddaughters create. Soft, natural, stitched together without effort. Now I felt the seams pulling. I couldn't ask her about it. Not yet. Not while the words were still so raw they felt like they were written across my own heart. I could only wonder who had planted that thought in her mind, and when, and why. The diary sat on the hallway table as I locked up the house for the night. I walked past it twice, resisting the urge to open it again, to search for more sentences that might explain the one that broke me. But I didn't. I left it closed, knowing that tomorrow Mia's mother would pick her up, and I would have to pretend nothing had changed. But everything had. For the next few days, I carried the sentence with me the way one might carry a bruise beneath clothing. Hidden but always sore when touched. I moved through my routines quietly, folding laundry, watering the plants on the porch, answering phone calls with my usual steady voice. No one would have guessed anything was wrong. I had learned long ago how to keep my emotions tucked neatly beneath the surface. But the words from Mia's diary clung to me like a shadow, slipping into every space of my thoughts no matter how I tried to distract myself. At the grocery store, passing the aisle where she used to beg for her favorite cereal, the memory appeared uninvited. Her tiny hand tugging at my sleeve, her eyes wide with the same hopeful spark her mother used to have at that age. I always bought it for her, even when her mother insisted I spoiled her too much. The recollection made me pause with my hand hovering over a box of pasta. I wondered if those moments had meant anything to her, or if the warmth I felt had been mine alone. Later, as I sorted through old photos in a drawer I rarely opened, I found a picture of us taken on her 5th birthday. She was grinning, frosting smeared on her cheek, her arms wrapped around my neck in a sticky embrace. I remembered how light she felt, how freely she loved in those early years. I stared at the photo longer than I meant to, searching her little face for clues. Was there hesitation I had missed? Was that embrace given or simply tolerated? Doubt seeped through memories I once thought unshakable. Even evenings on the porch were different now. The rocking chair beside mine, the one Mia always claimed as her own during sleepovers, remained empty but loud with questions. I thought of the nights she'd curled up under a blanket, cocoa in hand, telling me about her school friends or her dreams of becoming a veterinarian. I thought of how her eyes sparkled when she spoke, how she seemed to trust me with her secrets. And yet, someone had told her a version of the world where I was not truly hers. It was the scraped knee memory that hurt the most. She had tripped on the driveway 2 summers ago, the pavement leaving a harsh red mark across her skin. She sobbed until I lifted her gently into my arms, carrying her inside. I remembered how her wet face pressed against my neck, how she whispered that she only felt safe with me. That night I stayed awake replaying her small trembling voice in my head, trying to reconcile it with the words she wrote. Grandma isn't my real grandma. How could both be true? I found myself second-guessing everything. Every hug, every drawing she made for me, every spontaneous "I love you" she'd said over the years. I wondered if it had all been fragile, easily rewritten by an adult's bitterness or misunderstanding. Or worse, I wondered if she had spoken those words to me only because she thought it was expected. The hurt wasn't dramatic or loud. It wasn't the kind that forced tears or outbursts. It simply lingered, quiet, steady, patient. It followed me into sleep and greeted me in the morning. A soft ache beneath my ribs that reminded me something precious had shifted, and I didn't yet know if I could shift it back. And still, every time my phone rang, a small part of me hoped it was Mia. That hope alone revealed the deepest truth. Despite the doubt pulling at old memories, my love for her had never wavered. I just didn't know if hers had. The call came on a Tuesday evening, just as I was settling into the quiet. I had finished washing the dinner dishes, the warm scent of soap still on my hands when the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number at first. My daughter must have changed Mia's phone again, something she did often, claiming it was for school boundaries. I almost let it ring, too tired for another telemarketer or automated reminder. But something nudged me to answer. "Grandma!" The small, familiar voice filled my ear. For a moment I couldn't speak. Hearing her say that word, so casually, so softly, felt surreal, like being touched on a bruise I'd tried to forget. I held the phone tighter, grounding myself in the sound I'd missed more than I wanted to admit. "Yes, sweetheart," I finally managed. "I'm here." She sounded cheerful, innocent, completely unaware of the sentence that had carved its way into my chest days ago. "Mom said I can come over this weekend. Can we bake the chocolate chip cookies again? The ones with the big chunks?" There was nothing unusual about her request. She had asked the same thing countless times. But now it felt different, like a scene from a life I wasn't sure I still belonged to. My heart tightened, caught between joy and the sting of knowing she had written something that quietly pushed me away. "I would love that," I said, trying to keep my voice from trembling. "Saturday." "Yes. Can we also make the ones with the cinnamon edges? Mom doesn't make them right. She burns the bottoms." The laugh that escaped me surprised me. Came out thin but real. "Then we'll make plenty." "Okay," she chirped, her excitement snapping through the phone like bright little sparks. "I can't wait." She said it with such sincerity that I had to close my eyes. For a moment, the sentence from the diary felt like something imagined, a dream that had blurred into reality. But I knew better. The sweetness of this call only made the hurt sharper somehow, like sugar sprinkled on a wound. "Grandma," she said again, softer this time. "Yes, sweetheart. I miss you." Those 3 words slid into me with a gentler kind of ache, one that tugged at the part of me still deeply tied to her. I swallowed past the tightness in my throat. "I miss you too." After we hung up, the house settled into silence once more. But it wasn't the same silence I'd been living in. This one buzzed with confusion, questions, and something that felt dangerously like hope. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at nothing in particular, trying to make sense of the contradiction. A diary that claimed I wasn't her real grandmother. A phone call full of love and eagerness. A child caught between 2 truths she didn't understand. I wondered which version she believed more. I wondered who had taught her to question my place in her life. And most of all, I wondered what would happen when she arrived on Saturday, when I would have to face her smile, her innocence, and the page that had changed everything. My voice had been steady when I accepted her invitation. But my heart was trembling long after the call ended. Mia arrived on Saturday right on time, standing on the porch with her backpack slung over one shoulder and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her mother didn't come in, only waved from the car with the same hurried gesture she always used when she wanted to avoid conversation. The car pulled away before I even had a chance to say hello. Mia shifted from foot to foot, clutching the strap of her backpack like it was a lifeline. "Hi, sweetheart," I said softly. She offered a quick, almost practiced smile. "Hi, Grandma." It was the pause before she said the word that I felt more than anything. A tiny hesitation, barely a breath long, but sharp enough to cut right through me. As if she had to remind herself that this was what she was supposed to call me. Something she once said with ease now felt borrowed, uncertain. I stepped aside and she walked past me, but not with her usual bounce. She used to burst into the hallway, dropping her shoes wherever they landed, talking about school or her latest art project before she even set her bag down. But today she moved quietly, eyes skimming everything except my face, as though she were afraid that meeting my gaze might reveal something she didn't know how to explain. "Ready to bake?" I asked, trying to sound cheerful. She nodded but kept her backpack on, holding it in front of her like a shield. It wasn't until I gently touched her shoulder that she loosened her grip and finally set it down by the wall. Even then she avoided my eyes. In the kitchen, she washed her hands in silence while I gathered the ingredients. The air felt heavier than it usually did, filled with an unspoken tension neither of us could name out loud. Her shoulders were stiff, not relaxed and eager like they used to be when she stood on her little stool, waiting to crack the first egg. I handed her the bowl. "Want to mix?" "Okay," she whispered, barely audible. She stirred slowly, carefully, as if she were afraid of doing something wrong. It wasn't like her. Normally she mixed with the reckless enthusiasm of a child who believed messes were part of the fun. Now she was controlled, overly careful, watching me from the corner of her eye, measuring my reactions. The strange distance settled between us like a thin veil, visible only if you looked closely, but impossible to ignore once you saw it. At one point, I reached over to brush a strand of hair from her face, something I'd done countless times before. She flinched just slightly, just enough. The kind of instinctive recoil that lasts less than a heartbeat. But it echoed louder in the silence than any scream could have. She finally spoke while stirring the batter, her voice small. "Mom said we shouldn't talk about grown-up stuff." The words hung in the air. Delicate, loaded, fragile. Kept my tone steady. "We won't talk about anything you don't want to talk about." She nodded, relief and fear tangled together in her expression. She still didn't look me in the eye. We baked the cookies anyway, the chocolate chip ones and the cinnamon-edged ones she loved. She helped, she smiled a little, but everything felt filtered through that invisible curtain she carried with her. A hesitation, a distance, a quiet that didn't belong to her. By the time the cookies were cooling on the rack, I knew with certainty what I had only suspected before. Something had been said to her. Something she didn't fully understand but felt responsible for carrying. And the weight of it was already changing how she saw me. We were wiping down the counters when it happened. The kitchen smelled of warm cinnamon and cooling cookies, a scent that usually wrapped our afternoons in comfort. Mia stood beside me with a damp cloth in her hand, moving it in slow circles over a small patch of the counter as if she were polishing the same spot into perfection. She hadn't said much since we put the cookies in the oven. The strange distance lingered, quiet but unmistakable. I tried to keep things light. I talked about the flowers blooming in the backyard, about the new recipe I wanted to try next time she visited. She nodded politely, but her eyes wandered everywhere except toward mine. I could feel her holding something in, like a child gripping a secret that didn't belong to her but felt too heavy to keep carrying. She rinsed her cloth under the faucet, the water rushing louder than usual in the silence. And then, without looking at me, she said it, softly, almost like she hoped the running water would swallow the words before they reached me. "Mom says you weren't really there for her, so maybe you don't really love me either." The cloth slipped from my hands. It hit the floor with a dull sound, but it might as well have been a thunderclap. My whole body went still. The air around us seemed to freeze, thickening into something I had to force myself to breathe through. I turned to her slowly, afraid that any sudden movement might frighten her or make her shut down completely. She was staring at the sink, shoulders tightening, fingers curled into the hem of her shirt, as if she already regretted saying the words but couldn't take them back. "Mia," I whispered, but my voice cracked, betraying more emotion than I intended. Her chin trembled. She didn't look up. Mom said, when she was little, you didn't want her enough, that you were too busy. And that's why she had to learn to do things by herself. Each word was like a stone being placed gently on my chest. Heavy, deliberate, painful. And she said. Mia swallowed hard. She said that sometimes people pretend to love kids even when they don't. So I should be careful. Careful. As if love from me was something she needed protection from. My heart splintered in slow motion. There was no anger in her voice, only confusion. A child repeating something she didn't have the capacity to understand. Her mother's bitterness had slipped into her small, innocent hands, and she had carried it here, into my kitchen, into this moment I never imagined facing. I knelt beside her so we were at the same level. Even then, she kept her eyes down, staring at her shoes as if afraid to meet the truth in my face. Mia, I said softly, gathering all the steadiness I could find. I love you more than anything. Nothing your mother says will ever change that. Her lower lip quivered, but she didn't look up. She stayed frozen, as if waiting to see whether my voice would break again. And I loved your mom too, I added, though saying it reopened wounds I'd long tried to bury. Even when she didn't believe it. She finally glanced at me, just for a heartbeat, and I saw the conflict there. Fear, loyalty, confusion, longing. Too many emotions for a child her age to hold. I don't know what to believe, she whispered. And there it was, the fracture. The place where my daughter's resentment had woven itself into my granddaughter's understanding of me. I reached out slowly, giving her space to move away if she needed. My hand hovered near hers, close enough to offer comfort but not close enough to force it. I'm here, I whispered. No matter what you've heard, I'm still here. She didn't take my hand. But she didn't pull away either. The moment tightened around us. Painful, fragile, and irreversible. It was the moment I realized something deeper had broken long before today. Something I would have to face, even if it meant reopening every old wound I thought time had already closed. That night, after I dropped Mia back at her mother's house and returned to my own quiet kitchen, I found myself sitting in the dark with only the hum of the refrigerator for company. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't make tea. I simply sat there, tracing the cracks in the tile with my foot, letting the memories I'd spent years packing away rise to the surface like ghosts finally growing tired of being ignored. I had never told Mia the truth about those years. I had barely told my daughter. It always felt unnecessary. Painful pieces of a past no child should carry. But now, hearing Mia repeat those clipped, cruel versions of me, I wondered if my silence had become a blank page someone else felt entitled to fill. I thought back to the years after the divorce. I was a single mother with a child who deserved stability, and I tried. God knows I tried to create it. I worked 2 jobs because one job barely covered rent. I worked weekends because electricity bills didn't wait. I worked evenings because my daughter loved her piano lessons and I refused to take that away from her. Even when it meant standing outside the practice room in a uniform stained with fryer oil, smiling as if exhaustion wasn't pulsing behind my eyes. But a child doesn't see sacrifice. A child only sees absence. She didn't understand why I missed school recitals or forgot to sign permission slips until the morning they were due. She didn't understand why I sometimes fell asleep before dinner or why my hands shook when I counted tips at night. She didn't understand why I couldn't afford brand-name clothes or why I said no more than yes. She didn't understand the guilt that ate at me every time I left her with a neighbor while I went to scrub dishes or ring up groceries for people who could afford things I never could. And I never explained it because I thought one day she would simply know. I remembered the sharpness in her teenage voice when she threw my past back at me. You were never there. The words slamming into me with all the force of her adolescence and none of the understanding of adulthood. I remembered standing at the kitchen sink, dish soap mixing with the tears I wouldn't let anyone see. I remembered how that argument changed something between us. How resentment took root where closeness should have grown. Now, hearing my granddaughter say I didn't love her because her mother had to do things alone, I wondered when exactly the story had shifted. When my daughter had taken my long hours and exhaustion and turned them into abandonment. When she had decided struggle meant indifference. When pain became a reason to erase everything I had survived. Perhaps it happened slowly, bitterness layered over years, each disappointment reshaping the memory of what she once had. Or perhaps it happened quickly. In one single painful moment I didn't even notice. I would never know. But sitting there in the dark, I realized something with a quiet, piercing clarity. My daughter had spent years rewriting the past to fit the version of motherhood she understood, and my silence had made it easy. She had filled in the gaps with anger, with loneliness, with her own sense of loss. And Mia, sweet, innocent Mia, had inherited a story that was never meant for her. I pressed my palms to the table, grounding myself in the present. The years of working myself thin, the divorce that split our lives apart, the resentment that hardened between us, those wounds had never fully healed. They had simply faded enough to trick me into thinking they were gone. Now I knew better. Some wounds don't disappear. They wait, they soften, they settle. And eventually, they reappear in the voice of a child who has no idea she is repeating someone else's broken heart. I went to my daughter's house the next afternoon, not because I felt ready, but because the weight of Mia's words wouldn't allow me to wait any longer. The driveway was cluttered with chalk drawings and scooters, the kind of childhood mess that once would have made me smile. Today, it only reminded me how easily children absorb the world around them, how quickly something whispered in frustration becomes a truth they carry like a stone in their pocket. My daughter opened the door before I could knock twice. She looked surprised, but not pleasantly. Her posture stiffened the moment she saw me, as if bracing for a fight she'd already decided I would start. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice tight. "I need to talk to you," I said. I tried to keep my tone steady, not wanting to feed the tension that already crackled between us. She hesitated before stepping aside. "Fine. Come in." The living room was scattered with toys and half-folded laundry. A cartoon murmured faintly from the TV, left on for noise rather than entertainment. She crossed her arms as she leaned against the wall, waiting, impatient, defensive. Took a breath. "Mia said something yesterday. Something she clearly didn't come up with on her own." Her expression shifted, a flicker of guilt, quickly covered by irritation. "What did she say?" "She said you told her I wasn't really there for you when you were growing up. That maybe I don't love her either." My daughter's jaw tightened. "I never said you didn't love her. You implied it," I said quietly. And she heard it. She sighed as if I were being unreasonable. "I was just being honest. I'm not going to lie to my child about the past." Honest. The word scraped something raw inside me. "I never asked for lies," I said. "But there's a difference between honesty and rewriting the past to justify your hurt." Her eyes flashed. "Rewrite? Mom, you weren't there. I had to do everything myself. You worked all the time. You missed things. You weren't present." I felt the familiar sting but held my ground. "I worked because I had to keep a roof over our heads. Keep you fed. To give you more than I ever had." She looked away, her throat tightening. "You could have tried harder." The sentence hit me with the force of old wounds reopening. It was the same phrase she had thrown at me as a teenager, the same accusation she had carried silently into adulthood, now passed down like an heirloom she didn't realize was made of broken glass. "Mia shouldn't be carrying this," I said softly. "She shouldn't be questioning whether she's loved because of something that happened decades before she was born. She needs to know the truth." "No," I said, my voice steady but firm. "She needs to know your truth without being taught that it defines me or her. She's a child. She shouldn't be made to navigate our past." For a moment, something in her expression cracked, a flicker of vulnerability, a glimpse of the little girl who once climbed into my lap after nightmares. But it vanished almost instantly, replaced by the armor she's worn for years. "You don't get to tell me how to raise my daughter," she snapped. "I'm not trying to," I whispered. "I'm trying to protect her from carrying pain that isn't hers." The room grew still. The argument hovered between us, unsaid but present. This wasn't about one sentence in a diary. It wasn't even about Mia. It was about years of resentment my daughter had never unpacked, years I had been too busy surviving to fully acknowledge. And now, without meaning to, she had handed that resentment to her child. I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time I saw how deeply she still hurt. How old anger had hardened into habit. How grief and misunderstanding had calcified into a story she believed so fully she no longer recognized it as incomplete. In that moment, I understood something painful and simple. My daughter wasn't trying to hurt me through Mia. She was still trying to hurt the mother she remembered. And it didn't matter that I no longer resembled that version of myself. The past had outlived the truth, long enough to reach a new generation. I left her house feeling heavier than when I arrived, realizing this conversation was only the beginning of something far more complicated than I had hoped. I found the second diary entry by accident, just as I had found the first. Mia had forgotten her backpack in the hallway after our baking afternoon, leaving it by the wall the way children often do when they're eager to get home. I didn't open it with any intention beyond slipping her leftover cookies inside before dropping it off the next morning. But when I lifted the flap, a small notebook slid out. Her school journal, the one she used for class assignments. It fell open on the tiled floor, face up, as if it had been waiting for me. The handwriting on the exposed page was unmistakably hers, each letter rounded the way she'd practiced since kindergarten. At the top of the page, in blue crayon that had faded slightly, was the assignment prompt. Tell a story about someone in your family. Simple, innocent, harmless. What followed was not. Mom told me Grandma didn't want us when she was younger. Just one sentence, just like before. But this one carried weight like an anchor tied to my chest. I sank to the floor without meaning to. The journal still open in my hands, the world narrowing to those devastating words. Didn't want us. As if I had rejected an entire lineage. As if the years I spent working, sacrificing, aging too fast, and loving too deeply could all be reduced to that one careless, cruel interpretation. I felt something collapse inside me. Not a dramatic shatter, but a quiet buckling, the kind that happens after too many years of holding up too much without complaint. I pressed the heel of my hand to my mouth, but the sound still escaped. A broken breath that wasn't quite a sob but had the weight of one. The house around me blurred. The kitchen tiles, the refrigerator hum, the late afternoon light spilling through embroidered curtains. It all faded into a muffled haze as Mia's words looped over and over in my mind. Didn't want us. It wasn't just wrong. It wasn't just unfair. It was a rewriting so absolute that it made me question every moment I thought had mattered. All the birthdays I stayed up late prepping for, even on nights when my legs ached from double shifts. All the books I read aloud until my voice grew hoarse. All the nights I sat awake worrying when my daughter was out too late, hoping she would come home safe. All the mornings I packed lunches and tied shoelaces and braided hair with clumsy, tired hands. But memory is no shield against someone else's pain. And apparently, it had never been enough to protect the truth from being reshaped into something sharp and cutting. I touched the words on the page gently, as if trying to soften them with my fingertips. The strokes of her crayon were innocent, unaware of the damage they carried. Mia hadn't written the sentence with malice. She had written it because she trusted her mother, because children absorb what they hear, because she had never been told another version. I closed the journal slowly and held it against my chest. The ache was heavy, but beneath it was something else, something quieter, older. A longing I had pushed aside for too long. A wish that my daughter had seen me for who I was trying to be, not who she believed I failed to be. Tears finally came then, not loud or frantic, but steady, like rain that has been threatening for days and finally gives in. I cried for the years I spent trying. I cried for the misunderstandings that hardened into resentment. I cried for my daughter's wounds that had never healed. And I cried most of all for Mia, caught in a web of shadows she didn't ask to inherit. When the tears slowed, I wiped my face with trembling hands and closed the backpack. One sentence had once again rewritten the air in my home, but this time it did more than hurt. It told me the truth. Silence had given someone else permission to tell my story. And if I didn't speak now, Mia would never know the real one. I called my oldest friend, Marjorie, the next morning because she was the only person who had witnessed the early years of my motherhood without judgment. She'd been there for the sleepless nights, the last-minute babysitting, the dinners I skipped because I was working, the times I showed up to her door exhausted but determined to keep going. She knew the truth of those years better than anyone except me. When she heard my voice on the phone, she didn't ask pleasantries or make small talk. She just said, "Come over," in that firm tone she used whenever she sensed something cracks in me. So I did. Her house smelled like lemon polish and warm bread, the way it always had. The familiarity alone made my shoulders loosen, as though I'd stepped into a place that remembered me gently. We sat at her kitchen table, a bowl of fresh fruit between us, but I hardly touched it. The words I'd been holding too tightly spilled out. I told her about the diary entries, about Mia's hesitation, about the conversation with my daughter that felt like speaking through a wall that had been built brick by brick over decades. Marjorie listened without interrupting. She didn't console me with soft murmurs or shake her head in disbelief. She simply waited, her expression calm, steady, almost surgical in the way she observed the truth I was trying to excavate from beneath years of silence. When I finally stopped talking, emotions raw and tangled, she leaned back in her chair and said something so blunt it cut through the noise in my head. "Children believe the parent who speaks the loudest," she said. "Not the one who stayed steady." The sentence hung in the air with a weight I hadn't expected. I stared at her, confused at first, then slowly feeling the truth of it settle like a stone at the bottom of a lake. She clarified before I could respond. "You were steady, yes. You were. You showed up when you could. You loved her. But you didn't explain. You didn't defend yourself. You thought love was obvious. It wasn't." I wanted to argue, to say that I had tried, that I had done everything humanly possible. But the argument died in my throat because I knew what she meant. I had believed stability spoke for itself, that responsibility was proof of devotion, that my daughter would one day look back and understand the quiet sacrifices I made. I never said, "I am doing this for you," because it felt selfish to claim it aloud. Meanwhile, her father left, came back, left again, and every entrance and exit was grand and dramatic. Every disappointment was loud. Every apology was louder. My daughter didn't remember the soft hours I worked. She remembered the silence I wore like armor. Marjorie reached for my hand. "Your daughter filled the silence with her own story. And now she's passing it down. If you don't open your mouth, your granddaughter will never hear your version." My throat tightened. "I don't want to make Mia choose between us. That's not what this is about," she said gently. "You're not choosing sides. You're choosing truth." I sat with that for a long moment. The truth. My truth. Words I had never spoken because I didn't want to seem defensive or bitter, or like I was reopening wounds that had already scarred over. But scars don't protect you when someone else is repainting the past. I realized then that my silence, my attempt at peace, had become an open door for my daughter's unresolved anger. And Mia had walked right into it. Marjorie squeezed my hand once more. "You don't have to shout. Just stop whispering." Something shifted inside me. Not anger. Not revenge. Just a quiet resolve, like a long-held breath finally exhaled. For the first time in years, I felt the faint stirrings of my own voice returning. Steady, soft, but no longer silent. It happened on an afternoon that should have been ordinary. The sun was gentle, the soil warm beneath our hands, and the hum of bees circled lazily around the marigolds we were replanting along the edge of the yard. Mia knelt beside me on her little foam pad, her pink gloves already smudged with dirt. She had been quiet for most of the afternoon, but not in the distant, guarded way she'd been weeks earlier. This quiet felt different, thoughtful, heavy, as if she were turning something over and over inside her mind, waiting for it to soften enough to speak. We planted in silence, the simple rhythm of it comforting. She pressed the soil down around a sprout with careful fingers, then paused, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely louder than the breeze brushing through the leaves. "Grandma, why didn't you want Mom when she was little?" The trowel slipped from my hand and fell onto the dirt with a dull thud. For a moment I couldn't breathe. It was one thing to hear those words secondhand, filtered through diary pages and painful assumptions. But hearing them from Mia's mouth, spoken with innocent confusion rather than accusation, hit in a place I didn't know how to shield. I sat back slowly, brushing the soil from my hands. She didn't look at me. Her shoulders were small, tense, as if she feared she'd said something forbidden. I could see the question had been sitting inside her for a long time, building a wall between her heart and mine. I reached out and gently touched her elbow. "Sweetheart," I said softly, "who told you that?" She swallowed. "Mom. She said she had to take care of herself because you were always gone, and that you didn't want her enough." I took a deep breath. The truth was complicated, layered with years of exhaustion, mistakes, guilt, and choices I made out of survival, not out of indifference. But Mia was only a child. She didn't need the full weight of adult history. She needed clarity, honesty, a truth she could understand without it hurting her more. I turned her gently so she faced me. "Mia," I said, "I loved your mom very much when she was little. I still do. I never stopped wanting her. Not ever." She looked up at me then, eyes wide, searching for something she didn't have words for. "When your mom was little," I continued, "I had to work a lot. 2 jobs sometimes. I was tired all the time, and I missed things I didn't want to miss. I wasn't gone because I didn't care. I was gone because I wanted her to be safe. I wanted her to have food and clothes and a home. I wanted her to have more than I did when I was growing up. Her expression softened, but confusion lingered. But why did Mom say? Because, I said gently, sometimes grown-ups remember things differently when they hurt. Your mom felt alone sometimes, even though I was trying my best. She didn't understand why I wasn't always there. And maybe she still feels that sadness. Mia's voice dropped to a whisper. So you didn't stop loving her? I shook my head firmly. Never. Not once. And I love you just the same. More than you could ever imagine. She leaned closer then, something inside her unlocking. She rested her head lightly against my arm. Not quite a hug but the beginning of one. The tension that had lived in her small body for weeks finally loosened. I was scared to ask, she whispered. I know, I said, smoothing her hair with gentle fingers. But you can ask me anything. I'll always tell you the truth. Gently. Honestly. In a way that won't hurt you. She nodded, letting the words settle. We went back to gardening after that, but the air felt different. Lighter, warmer. The distance between us, once sharp and silent, had begun to fade, replaced by a fragile but growing trust. And as she patted the soil around a new marigold, her small voice floated toward me again, softer this time. I'm glad you wanted Mom. Because if you didn't, I wouldn't be here. I didn't speak. I just reached over and held her hand. In that moment, something inside me healed in a way I hadn't expected. We finished gardening just as the light began to soften, turning the yard gold around us. I suggested we take a break on the porch, and Mia followed me with the quiet obedience of a child who had finally exhaled a worry she'd been carrying too long. We settled into the wooden chairs, mine with its familiar creak, hers with the cushion she always chose because it had tiny blue flowers stitched into the fabric. She tucked her knees up and wrapped her arms around them, ready to listen in a way I'd rarely seen from someone her age. For a moment I just watched the sky shift. I needed the calm. I needed the breath before opening a door I had kept closed for years. Then I began. Not in a rush, not with blame, but slowly, the way one unfolds a delicate letter. When your mom was little, I said, I wasn't very strong yet. And life was heavy. Mia's eyes widened with attention, the way children listen when they sense an adult is speaking from a place that matters. I grew up poor, I continued. Poor enough that sometimes dinner was whatever we could stretch. When I became your mom's mother, I promised myself she would never feel that same kind of fear. The fear of not having enough. She didn't interrupt. She didn't fidget. She just watched me, her small face open and earnest. When your grandpa left, I said softly, I felt like the whole world fell apart. I didn't know how to be both parents. I didn't know how to be everything she needed. I only knew I had to try. My voice wavered, but I didn't hide it. So I worked, sometimes too much. More than any parent should have to. I took every shift offered. Cleaned houses. Bagged groceries. I did anything to keep us afloat. Mia blinked, her expression shifting as she tried to piece together the version of me she had been told versus the one sitting in front of her. I missed things, I admitted. Important things. School plays. Bedtime stories. Moments that hurt to think about even now. I pressed my hands together on my lap. But I didn't miss them because I didn't want your mom. I missed them because I loved her so much I refused to let her go without. She looked down at her sneakers, absorbing every word with the seriousness only children possess when truth reveals itself. Mom said you didn't want to be around, she murmured. I wanted to be around more than anything, I said, my chest tightening. But when you're poor and alone, love has to look like survival. It's quiet. It's hard. And to a child, that kind of love can feel like absence. Mia leaned her cheek on her knees, eyes glistening but steady. Why didn't you tell Mom all this before? I sighed. Because when your mom was hurting, she didn't want reasons. She wanted me. And I couldn't go back in time and change the moment she needed me most. I thought staying steady would eventually be enough. I thought love could speak for itself. She let out a tiny breath, almost a whisper. Oh. Mom only told me her side. I reached over and gently brushed a bit of dirt from her arm. Your mom told you the part she remembered. The part that hurt her. But not the part that hurt me too. Silence settled between us, not uncomfortable but thoughtful, as if the porch itself was listening. Finally, Mia lifted her head and looked at me with a softness that broke something open inside me. I didn't know, she said. I didn't know you tried so hard. I know you didn't, I whispered. And it's not your fault. She hesitated, then reached her hand across the space between us. I took it, feeling her small fingers curl around mine with surprising strength. Thank you for telling me the other story, she said. Not better, not louder. Just the other story, the part of the truth she never had. And in that moment, as the sun dipped behind the trees and the porch filled with the quiet warmth of shared understanding, I saw something change in her eyes. She no longer looked at me through her mother's wounds. She saw me. It was 3 days after that porch conversation with Mia when I heard a knock at the door. 3 soft taps, hesitant, like someone unsure whether they deserved to be let in. I wasn't expecting anyone. Mia had already gone back to school for the week, and the house had returned to its usual quiet rhythm. When I opened the door, my daughter stood there, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes rimmed with redness she hadn't bothered to hide. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She looked smaller somehow, as if something had drained the sharp edges she usually carried into our conversations. The wind tugged lightly at her hair, and she pushed it behind her ear in a gesture I remembered from when she was 12 and trying to cover up worry she didn't want anyone to see. "Mom," she said quietly, voice cracking on the second syllable. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside without a word. She walked in slowly, her gaze taking in the living room as if it were unfamiliar territory. She didn't sit, not at first. She stood near the coffee table, looking at a framed photo of Mia and me at her first dance recital. Mia beaming, me kneeling beside her, my hands wrapped around hers. My daughter's chest rose shakily, as if that picture alone were enough to undo her. "I talked to Mia," she finally said. "Really talked to her." My heartbeat picked up, but I stayed quiet. I knew enough now to let her speak on her own terms. She took a deep breath, then sank into the armchair like her legs had decided they couldn't hold her anymore. "She told me what you said. About the past. About everything." Her eyes filled, and she brushed at her face with her sleeve. "She asked me why I never told her those parts. The parts where you were trying. The parts where you were working yourself to pieces just so I'd have the things I did." I lowered myself onto the couch, waiting. "I didn't know how to answer her," she whispered. I just stood there. Because she was looking at me with this innocence, this confusion, and I realized I'd been teaching her only half the story. She lifted her eyes to mine, and for the first time in years, I saw raw vulnerability instead of defensiveness. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry." The words seemed to echo through the room, slow and trembling. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just let them wash over me. She went on before I could speak. "I let my bitterness take over. I let the child version of me, the one who didn't understand why you were gone so much, tell the story. And I didn't stop to think about what it must have been like for you." Tears spilled now, silent but unrestrained. I was hurt. And instead of dealing with it, I passed it down to her. She pressed her palms to her face. "Mia asked me if I was lying. She asked why I never told her you worked 2 jobs, or how you saved every extra dollar, or how you still tried to make holidays special even when you were dead tired." Her voice wavered. "Mom, she asked me if I made it up." My daughter looked up again, eyes full of shame and something like awakening. "And I realized I didn't make it up. But I made it incomplete. I told her the parts where I felt alone. I never told her the parts where you were fighting for us." I felt something tighten in my chest. Not anger, not satisfaction, just a painful, gentle ache. "I'm sorry," she repeated. "I didn't mean to hurt her. Or you. I just didn't realize how much of my past I was still carrying around like it was happening now." I leaned forward slightly. "We were both hurting," I said softly. "We just hurt in different ways." She nodded, tears slipping freely. "I don't want Mia to inherit that hurt. I don't want her to grow up thinking love looks like abandonment or resentment. I want her to see us honestly." She paused, voice trembling. "If you'll let me, I want to start over." For the first time in a long time, I saw my daughter not as the grown woman who built walls, but as the little girl who once cried into my shirt when thunderstorms shook the windows. The little girl who wanted safety. The little girl I tried so hard to protect in the only ways I knew how. I reached for her hand, something we hadn't done in years, and she let me. We sat there in the quiet living room, hands clasped, tears drying slowly. It wasn't a perfect apology. It wasn't a magical repair. But it was real. And for the first time in decades, I felt hope begin to settle gently between us. We chose a quiet Sunday afternoon for the three of us to sit together. No distractions, no rushing, no hovering sense of who should speak first. My daughter suggested it, her voice soft as she asked if we could try, really try to begin again. I agreed, not because I expected miracles, but because honesty had finally cracked open a door we'd all kept closed for too long. Mia sat between us on the couch, knees drawn up slightly. Her hands folded in her lap the way children do when they aren't sure if they're allowed to move. My daughter sat on one side, her eyes still a little red from crying earlier. I sat on the other, hands resting loosely in my lap, willing myself to breathe through the knots of old hurt. For a long time no one spoke. It wasn't uncomfortable, just tentative. Like we were all standing at the edge of something fragile, afraid to step too hard and break it. It was Mia who finally broke the silence. "I don't want anyone to be sad," she whispered. My daughter let out a breath that wavered. "We're not sad at you," she said, pulling Mia's hand into hers. "None of this is your fault." I nodded gently. "You didn't do anything wrong, sweetheart." Mia looked between us, searching our faces, making sure we meant it. Then she leaned slightly toward me, her small body relaxing just enough to show she trusted what she heard. My daughter swallowed. "Mom, I want to say this while we're all here." Her voice trembled but didn't break. "I told Mia things that weren't fair. Things I didn't understand fully back then. And I hurt both of you because of it." I didn't rush to respond. I let her speak, really speak, in a way she never had before. "I was angry," she continued. "And I held on to that anger until it felt like truth. But hearing Mia ask me questions I couldn't answer made me realize how much of that anger I had passed down." Mia shifted, her fingers tracing the seam of her jeans. "I didn't know Grandma worked so much because she loved you," she said quietly. "I thought she didn't want you." My chest tightened. Not with pain this time, but with the fragile tenderness of being seen by her. Finally, fully. "I wanted your mom," I said softly. "Even on the days when I was tired. Even on the nights I couldn't be home. I never stopped wanting her." My daughter closed her eyes for a moment, as if absorbing a truth she had spent her whole life resisting. "I believe you," she whispered. "I didn't for a long time, but I do now." There were more long pauses after that. Moments where emotions rose and settled, where the weight of all we'd carried slowly loosened. No one cried loudly. No one raised their voice. It wasn't dramatic, just deeply human. Three people trying to gently untangle the knots of a story told wrong for too many years. At one point, Mia crawled into my lap, something she hadn't done in months. Her warmth pressed against me, small arms slipping around my waist. I felt her breathing steady against me, and something in my daughter's expression softened as she watched us, not with jealousy or defensiveness, but with a quiet, aching relief. "I don't expect everything to be fixed today," my daughter said. "But I want us to start telling the truth. All of it." He nodded. "We can do that. Slowly. Together." Mia looked up at both of us, her eyes bright, hopeful in a way only children can be. "Can we make new stories?" she asked. For the first time in what felt like years, my daughter and I shared the same answer. "Yes," we said together. There was no grand resolution, no perfect moment tying everything neatly. But there was honesty, gentle, imperfect, real. And as we sat there, shoulders closer than they'd been in a long time, I felt the first subtle shift of something long frozen beginning to thaw. Repair doesn't happen all at once. It begins with three people willing to try. And that afternoon we finally did. Mia was spending the weekend with me again. The first one since the three of us had sat together and breathed through truths that had waited too long to be spoken. The air between us felt lighter now. Not completely healed, but softer, like fabric that had been stretched too tightly finally given the chance to relax. She moved through the house with an ease I hadn't seen in months, humming to herself, trailing her fingers along picture frames as if reacquainting herself with a place she had once felt entirely safe in. On Saturday afternoon, while a batch of brownies cooled on the counter, she disappeared into the living room with her backpack. I heard the quiet scratch of a pencil and the rustle of turning pages but didn't want to intrude. She was writing, really writing, in that way children do when the world feels close and their thoughts finally have room to land. Every so often, she'd peek into the kitchen to check on me, then return to her spot on the rug. After a long stretch of silence, she appeared in the doorway holding her small notebook, the school one, the one that had once gutted me with a single sentence. She clutched it with both hands, her grip firm but not anxious. Her eyes flicked up to mine with a mixture of determination and gentle hesitation. "Grandma?" she asked, voice soft. "Yes, sweetheart. Can you read something?" My breath caught just slightly, but I smiled and nodded. "Of course." She walked over and placed the notebook in my hands, then climbed onto the chair beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. Her warmth pressed into me, grounding me in the moment. I opened the notebook carefully, the pages filled with drawings and uneven handwriting. She had marked the page she wanted me to see with a sticker, a little yellow star. I turned to it, and there, written in her unmistakable looping letters, was a single line. "Grandma is my real grandma because she never stopped loving us." My vision blurred instantly, tears rising before I had a chance to swallow them back. The words were simple, childlike, earnest, but they carried the weight of everything we'd struggled through. It wasn't just a sentence. It was a correction, a declaration, a reclaiming of a truth that had been twisted by someone else's hurt. Mia watched my face with that pure openness only children possess. When she saw my eyes welling, she leaned gently against my arm. "I wanted you to know," she whispered. "I know the real story now." I closed the notebook slowly, savoring the feel of the page beneath my fingers. "Thank you," I said, my voice shaky. "This means more than you know." She tucked her legs under her, settling in beside me. "Mom read it too this morning," she added softly. "She said it's true." A warmth spread through me. Unexpected, fragile, but undeniably real. Not forgiveness, not yet. But possibility. Healing doesn't rush. Grows in small, steady ways. In honest conversations. In soft confessions. In a child's careful handwriting. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders, drawing her closer. She rested her head against me with complete trust, the kind that had once been shaken but was slowly, surely returning. "Can we write more?" she asked. "Like more real stories?" I kissed the top of her hair, breathing in the sweet scent of her shampoo. "We can write as many as you want." She smiled, bright and unburdened, and opened a fresh page. And for the first time in a long time I felt like the future, our future, had room to be rewritten too. One true sentence at a time. The dinner wasn't planned to be special. There were no fancy decorations, no holiday excuses, no reason to make it anything more than a simple evening together. My daughter suggested it one morning in a text message. Short, almost cautious, as if she didn't want to assume too much. "Dinner at my place this weekend. Just us." I stared at the message longer than necessary before typing back a single word. Yes. Months had passed since everything broke open, and in those months, the three of us rebuilt something. Not with grand gestures, but with small, steady ones. A phone call from my daughter on a weekday afternoon. Just to tell me about something on her mind. A photo of Mia's latest school project sent without prompting. A visit that didn't feel forced. Honesty that didn't sting. Silence that wasn't heavy. Every step was small, but every step mattered. When I arrived at my daughter's house that evening, the porch light glowed softly, and I could hear Mia's laughter from inside. It wasn't the brittle laughter she used when she was nervous. It was the real version. Bright, unguarded, the one I recognized from before everything shifted. My daughter opened the door and smiled. Not a tight smile, not a tired one. Real one. "Come in, Mom," she said. Her voice warm but tinged with that same carefulness we both still carried. It no longer felt like a barrier, though. It felt like respect, like we were both learning how to walk across a bridge we were still building. The table inside was nothing grand. Just spaghetti, garlic bread, and a salad Mia had proudly assembled, though the cucumber chunks were uneven and too large. She waved at me from her seat, her legs swinging under the chair. "Grandma." I saved the spot next to me. I sat, and she scooted closer until her shoulder brushed mine. It was a small thing, but it healed something tender inside me that I didn't even realize still faintly ached. Dinner wasn't perfect. The bread burned a little. My daughter forgot the Parmesan cheese and had to run back to the kitchen twice. Someone knocked over a glass of water. But it was real and it was ours. At one point, my daughter looked up from her plate, met my eyes and held them. "I'm glad you're here," she said. No explanations, no apologies attached. Just the truth, clear and unembellished. "I'm glad too," I answered, and I meant it more than she knew. After dinner, Mia pulled out her diary, her new diary, and handed it to me shyly. "I wrote something," she said, "because I wanted to remember today." I opened it, expecting a line or two. Instead, she had drawn 3 stick figures sitting around a table, each with a smile, each holding hands. Underneath it, she had written, "We're a family. A real one." My chest tightened, not with pain this time, but with something warm and steady, something whole. My daughter leaned over to look at the page and let out a soft laugh that broke into a sniffle. She touched Mia's hair gently, then looked at me with eyes that held gratitude, regret, hope, all tangled together but no longer sharp. As the evening wound down and the sky outside shifted into dusk, I realized the sentence in that first diary, the one that shattered me, hadn't ended our story at all. It had forced open a truth we'd all been avoiding, a truth that hurt enough to make us finally speak, finally listen, finally see one another clearly. The wound didn't disappear, but it knit itself back together in quiet ways. Through honesty, through effort, through the small moments that make a family real again. And as Mia curled up beside me on the couch, resting her head against my arm, I understood something simple and steady. Some stories don't begin with love. Some stories begin when you decide to rebuild it. And we had. Together.